My niece asked for my ID. A week later, I was $50,000 in debt. My name is Margaret Holloway, and when my niece asked for my ID, I never imagined that such a small, almost laughable request would spiral into the darkest chapter of my life. She had always been my favorite. Her name is Claire, my younger brother's daughter, and I practically helped raise her when her parents struggled through their divorce. She used to sit in my classroom after school while I graded papers, swinging her legs under the desk and drawing little flowers in the margins of my worksheets. To me, she wasn't just a niece. She was almost the daughter I never had. That's why, when she came to my small house one evening, her hands fidgeting, eyes darting around as though rehearsing a story, I listened more than I questioned. "Aunt Maggie," she said, her voice soft and careful, "can I borrow your ID for just a little while? It's just paperwork for something I can't explain right now. But it's nothing bad, I promise." The words unsettled me, yet her face, so familiar, so dear, made me hesitate. I asked, "Why can't you use your own?" She laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's complicated. Just trust me." Trust. That was the word she knew would catch me. My family had always accused me of being too trusting, too willing to see the best in others. But Claire wasn't just others. She was family. Still, a strange silence settled between us after I handed her my ID. She slipped it quickly into her purse, as though afraid I might change my mind. Then she hugged me, kissed my cheek, and said, "You won't regret this." But I did. That night, I lay awake in bed replaying the moment. Why did she need it? What paperwork could possibly require my identification? My instincts whispered that something was off. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that she was a young woman, 26, trying to start her own business, ambitious but always financially struggling. Maybe she just needed me for a reference. Maybe I was worrying for nothing. But my unease grew. Over the following days, I noticed small things. A call I missed from a number I didn't recognize. A letter that arrived with my name misspelled slightly, which I dismissed as junk mail. And Claire? She didn't come by or call, which was unusual. Normally she texted me at least once a week. Now, silence. I busied myself with work at the library, shelving books and helping children find stories for their school projects. But in quiet moments, I found myself staring at the rows of shelves, my mind elsewhere, my heart heavy with worry. I considered calling Claire, but I held back. If I asked too many questions, would she think I didn't trust her? I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, what harm could come from something so small? Then came the moment that cracked the silence open. 1 week later, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, official, and heavy with consequence. My name was printed neatly across the front. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside were statements, pages and pages of them. Credit card approvals, loan documents, account summaries, all in my name. The numbers stunned me. $50,000. Debt tied to me. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the papers, until the words blurred. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. A cold sweat ran down my back. I whispered to myself, "This isn't real. It can't be real." But it was. I flipped through page after page, each one detailing a new account, a new loan, a new weight chaining itself to my life. The dates matched perfectly. Everything had been opened within the last week. And the signature? My name, but not my handwriting. Sloppy, rushed, but close enough to fool someone who didn't know me. I dropped the papers onto the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. I thought of Claire, her nervous laugh, her quick hand slipping my ID into her purse, the way she hugged me like she was afraid I'd take something back. My heart sank. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself it couldn't be her. Maybe my ID had been stolen another way. Maybe it was a coincidence. But deep inside, I already knew. The house felt colder that night. Every corner seemed to whisper betrayal. I walked from room to room, clutching the papers as though they might explain themselves if I stared hard enough. But all they did was confirm the unthinkable. I had been deceived by the very person I loved and trusted most. I thought back to raising her, to birthday parties and Christmas mornings, to her tearful phone calls during her parents' fights. I had always been the safe place, the one who would listen without judgment. And now, she had used that love against me. The weight of it pressed on my chest until I sat down, head in my hands, tears hot and bitter streaming down my cheeks. The betrayal was personal. It wasn't just money, it wasn't just debt. It was family. And that cut deeper than any bill ever could. As I wiped my tears and looked again at the papers, a storm began to form inside me, not of rage, but of clarity. If Claire thought she could bury me under the weight of debt and lies, she didn't know me as well as she thought. I had survived too much in my 61 years to be undone like this. And yet, I couldn't help but whisper into the stillness of my kitchen, "Why Claire? Why me?" The letter had left me shaken, but nothing compared to the phone call that followed a few days later. It was a Wednesday morning. I was shelving biographies at the library when my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I stepped into the back room to answer, expecting a reminder from the doctor or maybe a friend. Instead, a stern voice greeted me. "Mrs. Holloway?" "Yes, this is she. This is Mr. Edwards from Harbor Financial Collections. We're calling about your outstanding balance of $50,000. When can we expect payment?" For a moment, the world tilted. My ears buzzed. I had to grip the shelf beside me just to stay upright. "There must be a mistake," I managed to say, my voice breaking. "I don't owe anything like that." The man on the line didn't soften. "Ma'am, according to our records, multiple loans were opened in your name last week. If you're claiming fraud, you'll need to submit documentation. Otherwise, interest accrues starting today." Fraud. That word stabbed into me, because I knew who had committed it. But admitting it even to myself felt like tearing apart the thin fabric holding my family together. I'll need time," I said weakly. "You don't have much," he replied. And then the line went dead. I stood frozen in the dim back room, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. The number 50,000 echoed in my mind, like a cruel chant. I thought of the modest savings I had, barely enough to keep me afloat in retirement, let alone repay such an impossible sum. I had no husband to lean on, no children to ask for help. All I had was Claire, and she was the one who had done this to me. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I smiled at library patrons, helped children find books, and nodded through small talk with colleagues, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept hearing the collector's voice. "When can we expect payment?" That night, the phone rang again. Another collector. Another demand. I didn't answer the third call. Or the fourth. By the end of the week, I had stopped answering unknown numbers altogether. My voicemail was full. The silence between me and Claire stretched wider. I tried to convince myself I should call her, demand an explanation, but every time I picked up the phone, my hand trembled. What would I even say? Did you steal my life from me? Instead, I sat at the kitchen table each night, surrounded by papers and statements, drowning in numbers that weren't mine. It felt like being trapped in a nightmare where everything was upside down. My good credit, my stability, my trust all collapsing in on me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My reflection in the mirror grew thinner, my eyes hollow. Every knock at the door made me flinch, certain it was someone coming to drag me away for debts I hadn't created. But worst of all was the gnawing ache in my chest. Betrayal isn't a single moment, it's a lingering poison. It eats at you slowly, day after day, until you question every memory, every word spoken, every hug you ever gave. I replayed the night she asked for my ID, over and over. the nervous laughter, the way she avoided my eyes. Had I really been so blind? The pressure mounted until one evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold across my living room, I made a decision. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I dialed Claire's number. My hands shook as I waited, my heart pounding like a drum. She answered on the third ring, her voice light, as if nothing were wrong. "Hi, Aunt Maggie. I was just thinking about you." My throat tightened. "Claire, we need to talk." Or, there was a pause, just long enough to confirm she knew what I was about to say. "Talk about what?" I got a call. About debt. $50,000. In my name. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "That's crazy. Someone must have stolen your ID." Her denial came too fast, too rehearsed. "Claire," I said softly, "you had my ID last week." Another pause, then laughter, high-pitched and false. "Oh, come on, Aunt Maggie. Are you accusing me?" "Me? I would never do that to you." "How?" But I heard the crack in her voice, the defensive edge. And in that moment, my unease hardened into certainty. The call ended soon after, her tone turning cold and distant, as if I were the one who had wronged her by asking. I stared at the phone long after the line went dead, my chest heavy with grief. I had hoped for remorse, a confession, even a shaky apology. Instead, I was met with denial, as if my pain were nothing more than an inconvenience to her. The next morning, another letter arrived, this time a warning of legal action if payment wasn't made. I sat at the table, the paper trembling in my hands, and realized the truth. I was utterly alone in this. The family I had given so much to would not save me. The niece I loved like a daughter had betrayed me, and the life I had built so carefully was crumbling around me, one bill at a time. The silence of my little house pressed in on me. My heartbeat echoed in the emptiness. I whispered to myself, as if to keep from falling apart, "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" And deep down, I knew it was. I woke up the next morning with my heart still racing. Sleep had been broken and shallow, a restless twisting in bed, haunted by the thought of collectors waiting to crush me under their voices, their threats. I shuffled into the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and sat at the table staring at the pile of papers I'd collected so far. The numbers stared back at me, bold and merciless. Loan amounts, credit limits, balances, all signed with my name. Except, it wasn't my handwriting. That detail stuck with me like a thorn. The signatures were shaky imitations, but imitations all the same. Anyone who had graded as many essays and papers as I had during my years as a teacher could spot it. I'd seen enough variations of sloppy cursive to know the difference. These weren't mine. They were someone else's attempt to be me. And the only person who had held my ID in the last week was Claire. I tried to dismiss it, tried to imagine some elaborate scam, strangers in some back room copying stolen IDs to make quick money. But no matter how I twisted the thought, my mind circled back to her. The nervous laugh, the rush to slip my ID into her purse, the avoidance of my eyes when I pressed her about it. I knew her too well. I pulled out a notebook habit from years of teaching and began to write everything down. Dates, times, phone calls, letters, every detail I could recall. The list grew longer than I expected, and the act of writing gave me a strange kind of clarity. On paper, the pattern became undeniable. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion, it was fact. That afternoon I called Harbor Financial back. My voice shook, but I steadied it. "I want to file a fraud claim," I told the representative. She asked for documentation. I explained the situation, leaving Claire's name out of it for the moment. My chest ached as I spoke every word, a reminder that my own flesh and blood had done this. But I couldn't bring myself to hand her over. Not yet. After hanging up, I sat in the stillness of my living room, the weight of my decision pressing on me. Protecting Claire meant exposing myself to further damage. Yet exposing Claire meant tearing the family apart forever. That night, I drove past her apartment, The lights were on. I parked across the street, watching the shadowy movements inside her windows. I remembered when she first moved there, excited and nervous, asking me to help pick curtains. I'd sat at her little dining table, reassuring her that she'd be fine on her own. Now, sitting in my car, I felt like an intruder in her life, a stranger peering in at someone I no longer recognized. I wanted to storm up the stairs, pound on her door, and demand answers. But something stopped me. It wasn't fear of her. It was the fear of what she might say. Because if she admitted it, I would lose her completely. And if she denied it again, I would lose her anyway. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the wheel, my jaw tight. The next morning, another letter came. This one was from a different company, another debt I hadn't created. My hands trembled as I opened it, but then something caught my eye. The address. It wasn't mine. The paperwork listed Claire's apartment as the billing address, only swapped out later for mine. My breath caught in my throat. It was the slip I needed, the one thread of truth that pulled the whole fabric apart. I sat back in my chair, my eyes burning. There it was. Proof. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't me imagining betrayal because of some nervous laugh. It was real, and it was Claire. I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest, tears rolling down my cheeks. My heart ached with a complicated storm of emotions: grief, anger, betrayal, love. How could the same girl I once carried on my shoulders at the county fair now see me as nothing more than a resource to exploit? I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry until my body gave out. But instead, I found myself whispering into the empty room. Why didn't you just ask me for help, Claire? I could have given her something. Not everything. Not enough to fill the hole she seemed to be digging, but something. I would have shared what little I had because I loved her. But to take it from me, to use me like this, was unforgivable. The following days blurred together. I worked my shifts at the library, answered calls from collectors with a numb tone, and filed fraud reports that seemed endless. But inside, my heart wrestled with itself. Part of me wanted to shield her, to protect her from the consequences of her actions. After all, wasn't that what family did? But another part of me, the part that stared at sleepless ceilings night after night, knew I couldn't carry this alone. By the end of the week, my notebook was full of evidence. I had letters, phone logs, dates, and now the damning address that tied everything back to her. I sat with the notebook open one evening, staring at the neatly written pages, and asked myself aloud, what am I going to do with this? The walls didn't answer. The silence only grew heavier. But I knew the truth. A decision was coming. One I could no longer avoid. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The evidence sat like a weight in my lap. The letter with Claire's address, the forged signatures, the mounting calls that refused to stop. My house no longer felt like home. It felt like a cage closing in tighter each day. I knew I couldn't go on avoiding her. So, on a gray Saturday morning, I drove to Claire's apartment, clutching the folder of documents like armor. My heart thudded in my chest as I climbed the narrow staircase to her door. She opened it after a few knocks, surprise flickering across her face before she smiled brightly. Aunt Maggie, you didn't say you were coming by. Her cheerfulness stung. It was too practiced, too polished. I forced a smile. We need to talk, Claire. She stepped aside, gesturing me in. The apartment smelled of lavender candles and takeout. A new purse sat on the counter, far too expensive for her usual budget. I noticed it immediately, the way a teacher notices when a student tries to hide something in plain sight. We sat at her small table, the same one where I once helped her fill out college applications. The memory ached as I slid the folder across to her. These arrived in my name. $50,000, Claire, all tied to your address. Her smile faltered. Her hand froze midway to her coffee cup. But then, as if rehearsed, she laughed. "Oh, Aunt Maggie. There must be some mix-up. I don't know anything about that." The denial was sharp, almost too sharp, and it cut deeper than a confession might have. "Claire," I said quietly, "don't lie to me. I taught you better than that." For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw her jaw tighten, her eyes dart toward the folder. But then she leaned back, crossing her arms with a practiced sigh. "You really think I'd do something like that to you? To family? That hurts, Aunt Maggie. Really it does." Her words twisted, turning the blame back on me, making me question myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I imagining connections because I wanted to believe there was an explanation? I shook my head. "The bills were sent here first, your apartment, then forwarded to me. Do you want me to believe that's a coincidence?" She rolled her eyes, a gesture so dismissive it sent a shiver through me. "Mail gets messed up all the time. You're jumping to conclusions." My throat tightened. "Collectors are calling me, Claire. They're threatening legal action. Do you know what that means for me? For my credit? For my future?" Her face softened, just for a moment. "I'm sorry you're going through that. Really. But it has nothing to do with me." The words were smooth, polished. But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered with something fear, guilt, or maybe irritation that I wasn't backing down. I stared at her across the table, the silence stretching until it became unbearable. I wanted her to break, to confess, to show even a sliver of remorse. But she sat calmly, sipping her coffee, as though we were discussing the weather. The niece I had loved and trusted was gone, replaced by someone cold, calculated, and willing to look me in the eye while denying the truth. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "If you won't admit it, then I'll find another way to prove it." Her expression hardened. The sweetness vanished. "Do what you have to do." Oh, Claire. There it was, the real Claire, stripped of pretense. I walked out of her apartment, my legs trembling but my resolve hardening. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just about money. It was about survival. If I let her continue, she'd drag me deeper until there was nothing left of me. Driving home, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The family would never believe me. They saw Claire as the golden child, smart, ambitious, full of promise. I was just the aging aunt, too sentimental, too suspicious. If I accused her outright, they'd say I was losing touch, imagining things. But I knew the truth. And the truth was a lonely place. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again, the documents spread out before me. My reflection in the darkened window looked like a stranger, tired eyes, hollow cheeks, a woman beaten down by betrayal. I whispered into the empty room, "I won't let you destroy me, Claire." "Huh." The silence answered back, heavy and unyielding. But beneath the weight of sorrow, something else began to stir. A quiet strength, the kind that doesn't roar but endures. I had been underestimated before, and I had survived. I would survive this too. The question was, how far was I willing to go? The week after I confronted, Claire felt like drowning in slow motion. Each day dragged me further under, each phone call, another wave crashing over my head. Collectors no longer called once a day. They called 5, 10, sometimes more. My voicemail overflowed with robotic voices demanding payment, threatening lawsuits, warning me of ruined credit scores. When I did answer, the voices on the other end were clipped and cold, always the same demand. "When will you pay?" I tried to explain. I told them it was fraud, that someone had used my ID. But all they wanted was proof, documentation, police reports, affidavits. The weight of bureaucracy pressed down as heavily as the debt itself. At night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, every creak of the house amplified in the silence. My mind raced in endless circles. What if they take my home? What if they garnish my pension? What if this never ends? The kitchen table had become my battlefield. Stacks of letters, forms, and notes crowded the surface until there was no room for anything else. Meals became an afterthought, a piece of toast, a cup of tea, as if food no longer mattered when my life was collapsing. I noticed how quickly my body betrayed me. My hands trembled when I picked up the phone. My chest tightened when I opened the mailbox. Even at the library, a sanctuary of order and quiet, I caught myself staring at the clock, waiting for the next call, the next threat. And then there was Claire. She didn't call. She didn't stop by. It was as if she had vanished into the ether, leaving me to carry the wreckage alone. When I saw her once, by chance, at the grocery store, she smiled as though nothing had happened. "Hi, Aunt Maggie. How are you?" How was I? I wanted to scream at her in the middle of the aisle, to show everyone the stack of letters and bills, to make her admit what she had done. But I stood frozen, clutching my basket of bread and milk, managing only a week. "I'm fine." The lie burned on my tongue. That night, another letter arrived. This one wasn't just a statement. It was a warning. If payment wasn't made in 30 days, legal action would begin. I sat at the table, the letter trembling in my hands, and for the first time in my life, I felt powerless. I had always prided myself on being strong. I raised myself after my parents passed, built a career from nothing, survived heartbreak and loss. But this betrayal from within my own family was different. It cut into my very foundation. I pressed the letter flat on the table and whispered, "She's ruining me." The phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. The answering machine clicked, a woman's voice sharp and rehearsed. "This is your final warning. Immediate action required." The words echoed long after the line went dead. By the end of the week, I noticed subtle changes in myself. My shoulders hunched lower. My voice grew quieter. My laughter, once so easy, had disappeared. Friends at the library asked if I was feeling well. I brushed them off, blaming allergies or stress. But inside, I was unraveling. I thought about my savings, modest, carefully built over years of frugality. I thought about the house I loved, the garden I tended, the books that lined my shelves. Everything felt suddenly fragile, as if it could be snatched away overnight. One evening, I sat outside on the porch, the cool night air brushing my face. The stars shone faintly above, but instead of comfort, I felt only the heavy truth pressing down on me. If I didn't act soon, I could lose everything. I thought of Claire again, her bright smile in the grocery store, her feigned innocence across the table in her apartment. How could she carry on so casually while my life fell apart? Did she even think of me? Of what she had done? Or had she already erased me from her conscience, the way she had erased me from the truth? The questions swirled until I whispered the one that haunted me most. What if she does this again? What if she isn't finished with me yet? That thought lit a spark inside me, small but steady. I couldn't keep living like this, suffocating under her lies, shrinking under the weight of collectors, pretending to be fine when everything was breaking. I had to find a way to fight back. The problem was, how? For now, all I had was silence, and the growing certainty that the girl I once loved like a daughter had become a stranger. And this stranger had no intention of saving me. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, when I least expected it. I had been sorting through another pile of letters, bright red stamps, shouting "urgent" across the envelopes, when the doorbell rang. My stomach tightened. For weeks, the sound of a knock or ring sent panic through me. Was it a collector? Someone serving me papers? But when I opened the door, there was Claire. She looked radiant, almost glowing. A new coat draped across her shoulders, her nails freshly polished. her hair shining as though she'd just stepped out of a salon. I stared at her, my mind cataloging every expensive detail. "Aunt Maggie," she said brightly, hugging me before I could react. "I thought I'd drop by. I've missed you." Her voice was honeyed, but beneath it I heard something else: calculation. I led her inside. She sat at the table, the very place where my life had begun to unravel. My papers and letters were still scattered across it, and I saw her eyes flick over them, just for a moment, before she smiled again. "How are you holding up?" she asked. The question struck me. Holding up. It was too precise, too aware. I hadn't told her about the collectors, about the mountain of debt crushing me. I had only hinted once, in that tense phone call. I forced my voice to stay steady. "I'm managing." She nodded, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping as though sharing a secret. "Don't worry. They can't actually take your house unless it gets to court. You've got time." My heart stilled, my breath caught. "How do you know that?" I asked quietly. Her eyes widened slightly, then she laughed, brushing it off. "Oh, I've read things online. Everyone knows how debt works." But the slip had already happened. Her words were too specific, too informed. She wasn't guessing, she was speaking from knowledge. I stared at her, and for a brief second, she avoided my gaze. It was a small thing, a flicker, but it was enough. That was the moment the mask cracked. I leaned back slowly, my mind replaying every detail. The ID in her purse, the bills at her apartment, the forged signatures, and now this. Claire knew exactly how deep I was sinking because she had dug the hole herself. She must have sensed the shift in me, because her smile faltered. "Aunt Maggie, don't look at me like that." "Like what?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. Like I've done something wrong." I didn't answer. The silence pressed down, thick and heavy, until she broke it with a nervous laugh. "You really don't think I'd hurt you, do you?" But the words rang hollow, bouncing against the walls of my kitchen. I excused myself, walking into the living room to steady my breath. My hands shook as I pressed them against the back of the couch, whispering to myself. She admitted it without even realizing. When I returned, Claire was scrolling on her phone, relaxed as though nothing had happened. She looked up and smiled again, her composure back in place. But I could see it now, the strain around her eyes, the flicker of unease. I decided not to confront her directly. Not yet. Instead, I played along. "I suppose you're right," I said softly, forcing a smile. "I have time." She grinned, relieved. "Exactly. You'll be fine." But inside, my heart was pounding. When she finally left, hugging me tightly and promising to check in again soon, I shut the door and leaned against it, my knees weak. I walked back to the table, to the sea of papers waiting for me. Her words echoed in my mind. "They can't actually take your house unless it gets to court." That wasn't something an innocent person would say. That was something a guilty person would let slip. For the first time in weeks, a strange calm settled over me. The storm was still raging, the collectors still calling, but now I had something more than suspicion. I had her words, her carelessness. It wasn't enough for the banks or the police yet, but for me, it was everything. I sat down with my notebook again, writing it all down. The date, the time, her exact words, her nervous laugh. It became part of my growing collection of evidence, my shield against the disbelief I knew I'd face from family. And as I wrote, a thought flickered in the back of my mind, dangerous but steady. If she could slip once, she could slip again. All I had to do was wait. After Claire's careless slip, something inside me shifted. For weeks, I had been reeling, reacting, suffocating under the weight of her betrayal. But now, with those words etched into my memory, "They can't actually take your house unless it gets to court," I began to move differently. Fear hadn't vanished. The collectors still called, The letters still piled high, and every ring of the phone still made my chest tighten. But beneath the fear, a new layer of resolve settled in. If Claire thought I would crumble, she didn't know me as well as she believed. I had lived my life quietly, teaching, saving, keeping to myself. I wasn't a fighter by nature. But I had survived loss, loneliness, and the exhaustion of years spent caring for others who rarely cared for me back. And survival teaches you something. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in silence, building like a tide until it rises high enough to change everything. So I began to prepare. My notebook, once just a scattered collection of dates and calls, became a ledger of truth. Each page bore evidence. Every threatening voicemail transcribed word for word, every letter carefully filed, every small detail recorded with the precision of a teacher grading papers. I even began recording calls. At first, my hands shook as I pressed the button, terrified of what I might hear, but soon I realized those voices weren't just harassment, they were proof. Proof that I was the one suffering, not the one guilty. Each evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of tea, the document spread before me, my pen scratching steadily across the paper. It became a ritual, almost meditative. The more I wrote, the less powerless I felt. I also started researching. At the library, between helping patrons, I pulled books and guides on consumer rights, fraud cases, and debt law. I learned the language of banks and collectors, arming myself with knowledge that gave me back some control. When the collectors called again, I stopped trembling. Instead, I asked for names, dates, reference numbers. I wrote everything down, each call another piece of ammunition. And Claire, oh Claire, she texted occasionally. Sweet little messages as though nothing were wrong. Love you, Aunt Maggie. Thinking of you. Each one burned as I read it. But I no longer responded with blind affection. Instead, I answered simply, keeping her close enough to observe, but distant enough to guard myself. One night, I got another call from her. She sounded cheerful, maybe even a little giddy. Aunt Maggie, she said, don't worry so much. Things have a way of working out. Okay. Her tone was wrong, too light, too dismissive. And then she added, almost as an afterthought, besides, they can't prove anything if you stay calm. I froze. They can't prove anything if you stay calm. I repeated it silently as I wrote it in my notebook the moment we hung up. The words weren't those of an innocent person trying to comfort me. They were the words of someone who had already prepared her own defense, someone who knew exactly what she had done. It hurt to write it down, but the act gave me strength. The following weekend, I bought a small lockbox. Into it, I placed my growing collection. The letters, the transcripts, the recordings, the notes. I locked it and slid the key onto a chain around my neck. It might have looked like paranoia from the outside, but to me it was armor. Claire had stripped me of trust, but she wouldn't strip me of proof. Still, the nights were hardest. Alone in bed, I replayed everything in my mind, her as a little girl with sticky hands from melting ice cream, her laughter echoing through my classroom after hours, the way she once clung to me when her parents fought. I whispered into the darkness, "Why did you do this to me?" No answer came, just the hum of the house, the creak of old floorboards. But slowly, those whispered questions turned into something sharper. What will I do about this? The question kept me awake, not with fear this time, but with determination. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for her to confess, or for the collectors to simply vanish. If I didn't act, I would lose everything. And Claire, she would keep walking free, maybe even repeat the cycle with someone else. One evening, after a particularly harsh call from a collector who threatened immediate legal escalation, I found myself speaking aloud, my voice steady in the empty room. No more hiding, no more silence. It's time. The words startled me not because I said them, but because I meant them. From that night, every action I took was deliberate. I met with a lawyer, bringing my box of evidence. I contacted the bank fraud department, explaining each detail calmly, precisely. Their skepticism was clear, but I kept my voice even, refusing to be dismissed. And with every step, I felt a little less powerless, a little more myself. Claire's betrayal had taken so much already, but it would not take the last thing I had left, my will to fight. I had spent weeks building my quiet fortress of evidence, but one truth gnawed at me endlessly. No matter how much I gathered, no matter how prepared I became, there was one battle I dreaded most: the family. I knew their reaction before it even happened. Claire had always been the darling of the Holloways, the one everyone praised for her beauty, her charm, her bright potential. I, on the other hand, was the dependable one, the one who picked up the pieces, who showed up quietly at every crisis, who never demanded attention. If I accused Claire, I knew how they would see me: jealous, bitter, paranoid. But the silence was suffocating me. I couldn't keep carrying the burden alone. So one Sunday, I asked my brother Claire's father if we could meet at his house for lunch. He agreed, sounding pleasantly surprised. "It'll be good to get everyone together," he said. When I arrived, the house buzzed with family chatter. Claire was already there, laughing in the kitchen with her cousins, her smile radiant as always. My stomach churned at the sight. How could she look so carefree while I sat sleepless under the mountain of her lies? We ate, we exchanged pleasantries, but I could barely taste the food. The folder in my bag seemed to burn against my side. Finally, as the plates were being cleared, I said softly, "There's something we need to talk about. Something serious." The room quieted. All eyes turned to me. My hands shook as I pulled the folder out, laying the stack of documents on the table. "These," I said, my voice trembling at first, then steadying, "are accounts and loans opened in my name. Over $50,000 in debt. The address used was Claire's apartment. The signatures are forged. And Claire had my ID." The silence was deafening. My brother frowned, his eyes darting to Claire, then back to me. "Maggie, are you sure?" "Yes," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I wouldn't be here otherwise." Claire let out a laugh, high-pitched and incredulous. "Oh my God, Aunt Maggie. Are you seriously blaming me for this? That's insane." She grabbed a paper from the pile, waving it dramatically. "Look at this. Anyone could have sent something to my apartment. You're making wild accusations because you're stressed." Her performance was flawless. The tears came next, shimmering in her eyes, her voice breaking. "I can't believe you'd accuse me of something like this. After everything you've done for me, do you really think I'd hurt you?" I sat frozen, the knife of betrayal twisting deeper. This wasn't just denial. This was manipulation, crafted to perfection. My brother reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Claire, no one's accusing you." Then he turned to me, his voice careful, patronizing. "Maggie, maybe the stress is getting to you. Identity theft is terrible, but you can't just assume." "I'm not assuming," I snapped, louder than I intended. My voice echoed in the room. "I have proof. Her address, her slip-ups, her words." But the family's faces had already closed against me. My sister-in-law's lips pressed into a thin line. My nephews exchanged uneasy glances. And Claire's sweet, beautiful Claire sat with her head bowed, shoulders trembling, playing the victim perfectly. "Aunt Maggie," she whispered, "I love you, but this hurts more than anything." The room shifted. Suddenly, I was the villain, the bitter aunt tearing apart the family, attacking the golden child. I tried again, softer this time. "Please, just look at the evidence, please." But my brother shook his head. "Maggie, I think you need rest. Maybe even some help. You've been under a lot of pressure." The words hit harder than any collector's call. Help, rest, as if I were losing my mind. I gathered the papers slowly, my hands trembling. No one reached for them. No one asked to see. The conversation moved on awkwardly, forced laughter filling the silence I had left behind. I sat through the rest of the afternoon numb, watching Claire bask in the comfort of family protection, her mask perfectly intact. When I finally left, the chill of the evening air hit me like a slap. I walked to my car with the folder pressed against my chest, my vision blurred with tears. They didn't believe me. They never would. As I sat in the driver's seat, I whispered into the darkness. You turned them against me, Claire. All of them. The betrayal felt even sharper than the debt itself. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about being silenced, erased, painted as unstable while she walked free. But as the tears dried on my cheeks, another thought rose inside me, cold and steady. They may not believe me now, but the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, they'll see who you really are. I started the car, the engine humming beneath me, and drove away from the house that no longer felt like family. The drive home from my brother's house was one of the longest of my life. My chest felt hollow, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I had walked in with evidence, desperate for support, and walked out alone branded paranoid, unstable, a woman unraveling. But the silence in the car, heavy as it was, carried with it another truth. If my own family wouldn't stand with me, then I had no one left to rely on but myself. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. His office was tucked between a florist and an insurance agency, the kind of modest place that suggested hard work more than prestige. His name was Richard Callahan, a man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and the kind of tired patience that comes from listening to too many stories of betrayal. I laid out the documents, my notebook, even my recordings. He listened quietly, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, my throat dry from speaking, he leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Holloway, he said, you're dealing with what we call familial identity fraud. Unfortunately, it's one of the hardest types of fraud to prosecute. Why? I asked, though part of me already knew. Because proving intent against someone you're related to is messy. Courts and banks hesitate. Families, close ranks, and juries. He sighed. They don't like to believe nieces steal from aunts. They'd rather believe you misplaced your ID. The words cut deep. But they were true. I had already lived the disbelief. Does that mean I'm helpless? I asked softly. He leaned forward, his voice firm. Number, it means we need to be meticulous. Every call, every document, every slip she makes you gather it. You've done well so far. Keep going. Eventually, the weight of evidence becomes undeniable. I nodded, clutching my folder tighter. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you protect yourself. Freeze your credit. Alert every bank. Don't give her another inch. That day, I did exactly that. I called every credit bureau, placed fraud alerts, shut down accounts, changed passwords I'd used for years. Each call felt like tearing down pieces of a life I had carefully built, but I reminded myself, it was better to burn the bridge than let Claire walk across it again. Still, part of me ached. Every action I took to protect myself was an action that widened the canyon between me and my family. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about love, loyalty, and the painful realization that blood ties don't always mean safety. But Richard was right, meticulous was the only way forward. So I dug deeper. With his guidance, I ordered copies of every loan document tied to my name. I spent hours at the library's computers, combing through records, piecing together a trail of deceit. What I found made my stomach turn. There were accounts beyond the 50,000. Small ones, scattered like breadcrumbs. A credit card here, a store account there, all linked back to me. Some had been closed already, balances paid off, which meant she had been at this longer than I realized. And worse, I wasn't the only one. Buried in the details were traces of her parents' information, too. An old address of my brother's, his date of birth misused on a form, her mother's maiden name listed as a password recovery. My chest tightened as I pieced it together. Claire hadn't just stolen from me. She had stolen from them, too. The very family who had leapt to her defense was already her prey. They just didn't know it yet. I sat back in the library chair, my heart pounding, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Rage and grief swirled together, choking me. I wanted to run to my brother, to throw the papers in his face, and scream, "She's doing it to you too. Wake up, before it's too late." But I didn't. Not yet, because Richard's words echoed in my ears. Eventually, the weight of evidence becomes undeniable. If I rushed, they'd dismiss me again. If I pushed too hard, they'd call me bitter, dramatic. No, this time, I would let Claire's own web trap her. That night, I spread the documents across my table, the patterns forming clearer than ever. Claire wasn't just reckless, she was skilled. She had learned how to forge, how to manipulate, how to weave lies so neatly they looked like truth. But in her arrogance, she had made mistakes. Small ones, but enough. A mismatched date, a reused phone number, a letter that slipped through to the wrong address. Mistakes that, if stitched together carefully, painted the picture she tried so desperately to hide. As I gathered them into my lockbox, I whispered into the quiet of my kitchen. "You can hide behind their love, Claire. You can laugh and cry and pretend you're innocent. But the truth is coming, and when it does, it won't just break me free, it will break you open." For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel like the hunted. I felt like the one holding the net. I stared at the box, heavy with evidence, and felt a strange calm settle over me. How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone? The question lingered in the air, sharp and heavy. And for once, I almost smiled. I waited until I was ready, not just with papers and recordings, but with the steel in my chest that comes from knowing you can't be dismissed anymore. For weeks, I had gathered every scrap of evidence. The forged documents, the billing addresses, the calls, even the mistakes she had left, scattered across applications. It wasn't just suspicion now. It was undeniable. And I wanted to see her face when I laid it before her. So I called Claire. My voice was calm, deliberate. "I need to see you, tonight." There was a pause, then her bright, casual tone. "Sure, Aunt Maggie. Dinner?" "No," I said firmly. "Just you. At my house. 7 o'clock. When I hung up, my hands shook not with fear this time, but anticipation. At 7 sharp, her knock echoed through the house. I opened the door to see her standing there, looking as flawless as ever, her hair perfectly styled, her coat pristine. She smiled wide, as though nothing in the world could touch her. "Hey, Aunt Maggie," she chirped, stepping inside. I led her to the kitchen table. On it, I had laid everything in neat rows, the documents, the statements, my notebook brimming with notes. The lockbox sat at the center like a judge presiding over a trial. Claire's smile faltered. "What's all this?" I sat across from her, meeting her eyes. "The truth." She gave a small laugh, feigning confusion. "You're scaring me. What truth?" I slid one paper toward her. "This loan. My name. My social security number. But your address." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before she shrugged. "So? Anyone could have used my address." I slid another. "This credit card. Opened with my ID. The same week you borrowed it." She shifted in her seat, her hand tightening on her phone. "That doesn't mean anything." I leaned forward, my voice sharp now. "Then explain this." I placed the letter in front of her, the one that had been sent to her apartment before being rerouted to me. Her breath caught. I saw it, the slip, the crack in her mask. "You can keep lying, Claire," I said softly, "but it won't change what's here. Every call, every document, every slip of your tongue, I have it all recorded, written, saved. You think you've been clever, but you've been sloppy. Her face hardened, the sweetness melting away. You wouldn't dare take this anywhere. Do you know what that would do to the family? I held her gaze. Do you know what you've already done to me? For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, the weight of years of love and trust hanging by a frayed thread. Finally, she leaned back, her eyes cold. So what now? You gonna run to the cops? Drag your own niece into court? I took a deep breath, steadying the storm inside me. I don't want to. God help me, Claire. I never wanted this. But you've left me no choice. You've stolen my life, my peace, and you've turned the family against me. If you think I'll just sit quietly, you don't know me at all. Her lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. You won't do it. You don't have it in you. I reached into the lockbox and pulled out the small recorder I had placed on the table the moment she walked in. I pressed play. Her voice filled the kitchen from our last call. They can't actually take your house unless it gets to court. Claire's face drained of color. I let the recording play, then shut it off. You slipped, Claire. And this is only one of many. You think I don't have the courage? Watch me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw real fear in her eyes. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. You don't know what you're doing, she hissed. You'll regret this. Last. No, I said, my voice steady. You will. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The house shook with the force, but I sat still at the table, my hands resting on the papers. My body trembled not from fear, but release. I had done it. I had faced her, stripped away the mask, and shown her that I wasn't powerless. For hours after she left, I sat in silence, listening to the echo of our confrontation. My chest ached with grief, but beneath it was something new, a quiet certainty that the tide had turned. Claire might still deny. The family might still choose to protect her, but the truth was no longer just mine to carry. And sooner or later, it would surface. I didn't sleep that night. After Claire stormed out of my house, slamming the door like a warning shot, I sat at the kitchen table long into the early hours. The documents were still spread across the wood, the recorder lying silent, the weight of her words pressing into me. You don't know what you're doing. You'll regret this. The threat lingered like smoke in the air, but beneath it, something else remained, the look of fear in her eyes when I played that recording. For the first time, she had been cornered. By morning, though, fear was replaced by something more vicious. My phone buzzed relentlessly. First my brother, then my sister-in-law, then cousins. All of them, one after another, their voices sharp with outrage. Maggie, what have you done? My brother demanded when I finally answered. His voice was low and furious. What do you mean, what have I done? I said, though my heart already knew. You ambushed Claire last night. She came home in tears. She said you accused her, trapped her, tried to record her. What the hell is wrong with you? I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. Because she did do it, Tom. She forged my name. She used my ID. She buried me under debt. I have proof. Proof? He snapped. You're seeing what you want to see. You're obsessed, Maggie. You're ruining her life over nothing. Over nothing. The words hit like a slap. She's 26 years old, Tom, I said, my voice trembling. And she's already learned to lie, to steal, to destroy trust. If you don't face it now, she'll ruin more than just me. She'll ruin herself. But he wouldn't hear it. His voice rose, angry, protective. Number. You're jealous. You've always been jealous of how the family loves her, of how she shines. You're twisting this into something it's not, because you can't stand being in her shadow. I froze, stunned. Jealous? Of Claire? The idea was absurd. But I could hear in his tone that he believed it. He needed to believe it. Because the alternative that his daughter was capable of this was too unbearable. The call ended with him slamming the phone down. My hands shook as I lowered mine. The next day, my sister-in-law called. Her voice was cool, measured, but the blade underneath was sharp. "Margaret, you need to stop this nonsense before you destroy our family. Claire is young, she makes mistakes, but she would never do what you're accusing her of. If you keep pushing this, you'll regret it. We won't forgive you." Regret, forgive. Words that turned everything upside down. They were demanding my silence, my complicity, as if I were the one tearing the family apart. Not Claire, me. And the others followed. Cousins sending messages dripping with disappointment. "Why are you attacking Claire? She's always loved you. Are you losing it, Aunt Maggie? Do you need help?" Help. That word again, thrown at me like an insult, as if I were a fragile old woman losing her grip on reality. Meanwhile, the collectors didn't stop. Their voices grew sharper, more insistent. Letters escalated to legal warnings, threatening liens, lawsuits, garnishments. I was suffocating under real consequences, while Claire played the victim wrapped in the family's embrace. One evening, I sat at the table, another letter in my hand. My tears blurred the words, dripping onto the paper. I whispered to the empty room. Why do they protect her, while I'm the one drowning? The answer, I knew, was simple. Because it was easier. Easier to believe I had lost my mind than to face the truth that their beloved Claire had become a thief. But as the days passed, grief hardened into something sharper. I stopped answering the family's calls. I let their accusations ring unanswered, their messages pile up. If they chose blindness, so be it. I wouldn't carry that blindness with them. Instead, I focused on the evidence, on Richard's advice, on the truth I held in my lockbox. I reminded myself with every paper, every recording, every note. I am not crazy. I am not jealous. I am not wrong. One night, when the house was quiet, I opened the box and stared at its contents. The documents, the recordings, the growing pile of undeniable facts. My reflection in the glass of the kitchen window stared back at me, older, wearier, but steady. "They think I'm ruining her future," I whispered, "but she ruined mine first." The words burned in my chest. It struck me then, the family wasn't just blind. They were complicit. By refusing to see, by blaming me, they gave her permission to keep going. And one day, when her lies grew too heavy, even for them to deny, they would realize too late who had been trying to save them all along. Until then, I would carry this burden alone, but I would carry it with purpose. They could call me jealous. They could call me crazy. They could call me a traitor to my own blood. But when the truth finally came crashing down, as it always does, they would have no choice but to remember this moment. And they would know. It wasn't me who betrayed them. It was Claire. The silence of my house became unbearable. Once, it had been a comfort, the soft tick of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator. Now it felt like the soundtrack of abandonment. The family's calls had slowed, not out of support but out of condemnation. Their silence meant judgment. I was the aunt who had turned against her own. Meanwhile, the letters kept coming. Each one thicker, each one harsher, each one a reminder that I was drowning in someone else's sins. Collectors didn't care about family drama. They wanted money, signatures, outcomes. Richard, my lawyer, met me again. He studied my growing stack of evidence, his face unreadable. When I finished laying everything out, he exhaled slowly and said, "You have enough to press charges now. The trail is clear. If you file, she will face consequences." I swallowed hard. Consequences meaning prison? Possibly. Fraud on this scale with documented evidence is a serious crime. But you need to understand, Mrs. Holloway, once you take this step, there's no going back. It will tear your family apart. Tear it apart. Hadn't it already been torn? My brother no longer looked me in the eye. My sister-in-law spoke of me like I was sick, unstable. The cousins avoided me entirely. Claire walked free among them, draped in their sympathy, while I sat alone in my little house under the weight of her lies. But pressing charges, it wasn't just about me. It was about Claire's future, her life. Could I really send my niece, the girl I once rocked to sleep? The girl whose scraped knees I once bandaged, into a courtroom, into handcuffs, into the cold machinery of justice? That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every moment. Claire as a child, her laughter ringing through my classroom after school, and Claire as an adult, smiling sweetly while forging my name, standing in my kitchen, denying everything, turning the family against me. Which Claire was real? The girl I loved? Or the woman who betrayed me? I rose from bed and went to the kitchen table. The lockbox sat there, heavy and final. I unlocked it, spread out the papers, and stared at them until my vision blurred. The choice was simple in logic, impossible in heart. Forgive and carry the burden myself, or press charges and watch her face the ruin she had created. I thought of the family, how they would react. They would never forgive me. They would paint me as cruel, vindictive, heartless. But I also thought of the collectors, of the debt suffocating me, of the nights I spent crying into my hands while Claire painted her nails with money that wasn't hers. I whispered aloud, "Why is the weight always on me? Why am I the one who must choose between breaking or breaking her?" The walls offered no answer. The next morning, I stood outside the police station, with my folder clutched in my arms. My knees felt weak. My heart thudded like a drum. I imagined walking inside, laying the papers on the desk, saying the words that would change everything. My niece stole my identity. I want to press charges. But I didn't move. I stood there for nearly an hour, the cold wind biting at my cheeks, watching others walk in and out, people who seemed so certain, so decisive. I wasn't. Finally, I turned and walked away, my folder still pressed against me like armor. For days afterward, I drifted between certainty and hesitation. One moment, I told myself I would press charges. The next, I saw Claire's face as a child and felt my resolve collapse. But each time another letter arrived, each time another call threatened me, the scales shifted. Forgiveness began to look less like mercy and more like surrender. On the fifth night after standing outside the station, I sat again at my table. I opened the recorder, playing Claire's voice. "They can't actually take your house unless it gets to court." The coldness in her tone, the arrogance, the lack of remorse, it was all the answer I needed. I pressed stop and whispered into the silence, "Justice, then." The words felt final. The next morning, I dressed carefully, tucking the folder under my arm once more. This time, when I stood outside the station, I didn't hesitate. I walked inside. The air was sterile, the walls pale, the smell faintly of disinfectant. A young officer looked up from the desk and asked, "How can I help you, ma'am?" I placed the folder on the counter, my hands steady. "I need to report identity fraud. The person responsible is my niece." The words cut like glass as they left my mouth, but they were sharp with truth. The officer nodded, pulling the folder toward him. Papers spilled across the desk, Claire's trail of lies, her careless slips, her betrayal. I watched as he began flipping through them, my heart heavy, my throat tight. This was it, the point of no return. For better or worse, I had chosen. The days that followed my report blurred into one another, heavy with tension. The police began their work, contacting banks, gathering statements, cross-checking the evidence I had so carefully collected. My phone rang often. Detectives, bank representatives, my lawyer. Each call brought me closer to something I thought I wanted: justice. But with every step forward, my heart ached. Word spread quickly, of course. By the end of the week, my brother was at my door, his face pale with rage. He didn't even step inside. "How could you?" he hissed. His voice shook with something between fury and grief. "She's my daughter, Maggie. My child. You've destroyed her." No, I said softly, standing in the doorway with my arms crossed against the weight of his anger. "She destroyed me first. She left me with $50,000 in debt, collectors at my door, nights without sleep. You saw the evidence, you just didn't want to believe it." His eyes burned, but I also saw something else there. Fear. He knew. On some level, he knew I was right, but admitting it out loud would mean admitting his daughter had become a criminal. So he turned and walked away, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. The family fractured after that. Some stopped speaking to me altogether. Others sent messages filled with venom. "You could have handled this quietly. You didn't have to ruin her life. Blood is supposed to mean something. But what did blood mean when it bled you dry?" Weeks passed. Claire was questioned, her lies exposed piece by piece. She denied, twisted, even tried to paint me as senile and confused. But the evidence was too heavy this time, too meticulous, too clear. My notebook, my recordings, my locked box, they became my voice when my own words had failed. The truth surfaced, dragging her with it. I remember the day Richard called me. "They've filed charges," he said. His voice was calm, but I heard the weight in it. "Claire will face trial." I hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. I expected triumph, relief, vindication, but what I felt was grief. Not grief for the debt that, finally, was being untangled by the banks and courts. Not grief for the collectors their voices had grown quieter as the case progressed. No. The grief was for something less tangible, more permanent. I had lost Claire, not just the woman who betrayed me, but the girl I once knew, the child with sticky hands from melted ice cream, the teenager who whispered secrets to me during family fights, the young woman who once hugged me and said, "You're more like a mother than an aunt." That girl was gone. Or perhaps she had never truly been there. The trial loomed ahead, but in many ways, the verdict no longer mattered. The damage had been done. My family was broken. Trust was shattered, and I was left in the ruins, holding pieces of a life that would never fit back together again. Yet, strangely, I felt stronger than I had in months. Because I had chosen. I had refused to be silenced. Refused to let love blind me to the truth. It came at a cost. Yes, but survival often does. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold. I thought of forgiveness, of the word that had haunted me for so long. Could I ever forgive Claire? Perhaps, someday, I would forgive her for my own sake, to let the bitterness ease. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness didn't mean erasing the truth. I whispered into the cool night air, "I forgive you for being lost, Claire, but I will never forget what you did." The stars blinked faintly above, indifferent witnesses to my vow. Now, when the phone rings, I no longer tremble. When I open the mailbox, I no longer flinch. The storm has not ended completely, but I know I can weather what remains. And though I sit alone in this house, I am not broken. I am scarred. Yes, but scars are proof of healing, not weakness. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Betrayal does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from those you love most, those you'd sacrifice everything for. And when it does, you face a choice to drown quietly in silence, or to rise, even if it means standing alone. I chose to rise. And while I carry the grief of what I lost, I also carry the quiet strength of knowing I refuse to let lies define me. So I leave you with a question. If you were in my place, would you forgive, or would you demand justice? Because in the end, the truth always comes with a cost. And mine was $50,000, a fractured family, and the end of an illusion. But it also gave me something I had forgotten: I had my own voice. Slow fade out, 200, 300 words. The night is still as I sit here, the papers locked away, the phone finally silent. My house feels different now. Not a cage, but a fortress. A place where truth, no matter how painful, has been spoken. I think of the family often, of how they look at me now with suspicion, anger, even pity. They think I've destroyed something precious. But what I destroyed was only the mask. The rot was always underneath, waiting to be revealed. Claire's face lingers in my mind, not the woman she is now, but the girl she used to be. Sometimes, I wish I could go back, hold that child, and whisper the wisdom I now carry. That lies always collapse, that love cannot be built on theft, that betrayal poisons more than it feeds. But time doesn't grant us do-overs. It only gives us choices. I chose truth. And though it left me standing alone, though it carved wounds I still feel each night, it also gave me peace. If you've lived through something like this, I hope my story shows you. You are not powerless. You are not invisible. Your voice matters, even when no one wants to hear it. And if you've been betrayed, remember, survival is its own kind of victory, because here I am, still standing.